morning. Namaskar, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome. On behalf of the ABP network, it is my absolute privilege to welcome you to Ideas of India 2023. My name is Radhika Bajaj, and I'm delighted to be your host. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, as we embark on this second exchange of ideas and insights, we have to acknowledge that the past year has changed the world and, of course, India's place in it. A prolonged war, an economic slowdown, economic meltdowns, a catastrophic earthquake, not to forget the lingering effects of a global pandemic and ongoing climate change. This is our world today. Within that, India is finding itself at a very critical juncture as a brand new world order emerges. Even as the focus is on looking inward and being Atmanirbhar, India, as the G20 chair, knows the importance of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family. There is clearly much to deep dive on, so let's begin the proceedings of the day on a very auspicious note and seek blessings from the higher powers. For the lighting of the lamp ceremony, I'd like to first very warmly welcome our keynote speaker and chief guest for Ideas of India 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Liz Truss. Good morning and welcome to you, ma'am. And for the ceremony, let's also welcome Avinash Pandey, CEO, ABP Network. I'd also like to invite Dhruva Mukherjee, the CEO of ABP Private Limited, to join us for the ceremony. May the lighting of the lamp bring us success in our endeavors. Thank you very much.
With like-minded countries to create what I describe as an economic NATO. So what we see is authoritarian regimes working together. Xi and Putin have declared themselves best of friends, and they are backing each other up. They're backing each other up in terms of what message they're putting out to the rest of the world. And we, on the side of freedom and democracy, need to back each other up too. And that means working together on trade more closely. It means working together on investment. We know that the Belt and Road Initiative has led lots of countries in debt and lots of countries influenced by China to do things in different ways, to vote in different ways at the UN. We need an alternative that's underpinned by freedom and democracy. And we also need to make sure that we're working together on critical minerals and supply chains. Now, during the height of the COVID crisis, I worked very closely with the Indian government on some key supplies like medicines. And what we always discovered, and I discovered this with many other countries, is we didn't always know where the supply chain finished. And quite often, it would finish with somebody or a country that we couldn't trust. Now, in the UK, we've taken action. We've removed Huawei from our telecoms networks. We've now divested ourselves of getting oil and gas from Russia. But what I would like to see is I'd like to see free democracies work together so that we are together deciding what kind of technology is it right to export to an autocratic regime where it could be used to undermine freedom and democracy. Who do we offer the deepest trade deals to? Is it a country that we trust, or is it a country that we don't trust? When we're investing in green energy, like solar panels, where are we getting those solar panels from? How are they being produced? These are all questions we need to answer. We need to be conscious that those economic decisions we make will affect the future of freedom and democracy. Because what we've seen is we've seen authoritarian regimes use that economic coercion against us. So we need to use it in the service of freedom and democracy. And we need to get on with it. I would love to see the India-UK trade deal finished as soon as possible. I want to see our accession to, there's some fans in the audience of that. I would like to see us complete the CPTPP accession as soon as possible, because the next few years are going to be absolutely crucial for our security and for our democracy. And of course, economic clout is vitally important. And India's economic clout has grown significantly, will grow much more in the coming years. But that economic clout does need to be backed by hard security, because what we saw in the Russia-Ukraine situation is even a country which was not apparently very economically successful has been able to create huge misery and attack a free, democratic neighbor in Europe. And what we know is no one is immune from that around the world. No free democracy is automatically safe. We need to make sure it's safe. And what that is going to take is much more close working on security. And of course, India is a vital security partner for the United Kingdom, but also for our allies around the world. The last time I visited Mumbai was at the end of 2021. And I went out to the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier and watched the F-35s take off from the carrier, which is a fantastic sight. And in fact, the F-35s are based in my constituency in Norfolk, in England. So I actually met some local pilots from Norfolk in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It was a great experience. But what was particularly good was to see that we were conducting joint military exercises with the Indian Armed Forces. And that is what we need to be doing more of. We need closer collaboration in areas like intelligence, in defense, and in defense production, because what we know as a result of the war in Ukraine is that we need to build up our stockpiles, we need to be manufacturing more, and of course India is in an ideal position to be doing more of that manufacturing of defense equipment. So we have a real opportunity for that closer collaboration. I also believe that India has a very important role to play in the Indo-Pacific Quad. People kept asking me whether the UK wanted to join the Indo-Pacific Quad. I said I didn't think we were yet ready to move to the Pacific, but I fully support the grouping of the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. I think that is going to be vitally important for protecting freedom of navigation in the Pacific, and I would like to see that develop into a more formal alliance so that we make sure democracy is protected. Because what we've learned from the war in Ukraine is that if an authoritarian regime feels that there isn't going to be a reaction, then they will act. And we know that President Xi has said that he wants to create one China, that he wants to see Taiwan under Chinese control. I think that would be disastrous. I think that would have implications not just for Taiwan, another free democracy that we simply do not want to see extinguished, but it would also have real implications for the ability for freedom of navigation, for trade, and for security in the Indo-Pacific area. Of course, we need to develop our links with Taiwan economically. That's something that we're doing in the United Kingdom, and we want to see allies do that as well. but we also need to make sure that Taiwan's able to defend itself, because prevention is better than cure. And stepping up our economic efforts to coordinate is going to be very important at this stage before it's too late. And one of my main messages to people here today is we learned the hard way what not preparing looks like with the war in Ukraine. Of course, Putin is responsible for that war. He's the perpetrator. But we all know in Western Europe that we should have done more earlier. Let's learn that lesson for Taiwan. Let's make sure that Taiwan's able to defend itself. And let's make sure that we've built up that economic resilience so that China cannot use economic coercion to achieve the objectives that they either achieve militarily or by that coercion. Finally, I wanted to say that there's a lot of gloomy talk at the moment, and we heard that earlier, that the world has suffered some really severe, the COVID crisis, the war in Ukraine. Sometimes it feels like things are not getting any better, that society or that the concept of freedom and democracy is not on the upward rise, it's in the decline. But I refuse to accept that gloomy talk. And I think in India, we see the greatest hope for our future of virtually anywhere in the world. A free democracy that is growing rapidly. A country of pluralism, a country where free speech, the ability to get things done, is improving all the time. And what I want to do today, and I have been doing in my visit to India so far, is I want to encourage India to do even more. This is not just about India's future, which I believe is very positive. This is about the world's future. And if we take action now, to whether it's improving our supply chains, improving our defense links, working together more closely to counter disinformation, that work is going to pay huge dividends in the future. And what we need to do is use the dynamism of this country, use the opportunities this country is creating to really deliver, not just for India, but for freedom and democracy, and ultimately for the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Truss, for highlighting the shared values of freedom and democracy and how they make for a very solid foundation for more cooperation between India and the UK. Of course, there are many questions we'd like to put to Ms. Truss, and for that, I hand it over now to senior journalist and author Veer Sanghvi to please join us as the session chair. A big round of applause for Mr. Veer Sanghvi.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. I have very bad luck with microphones. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We don't have much time. Ms. Truss has a flight to catch, so we're going to go right into it. Some of the things you said about the threat that democracies face from non-democracies, some of which are expansionist, some of which wish to impose their views and their might on other countries, I think resonates with Indians because we feel that way. But here are our doubts. Our doubts are, does the West speak in one voice? What you've said about Putin, for instance, I think everybody agrees with. I think everybody in the West now says that. But only 5 years ago, the United States under Trump was singing a different tune. So how do we trust the West?
Well, this is where I believe India has a huge role to play.
Yeah.
I don't think India is a follower in this. I think India is a leader.
Yeah.
You're the world's biggest democracy, the world's biggest country now by population, an economic powerhouse. And India, as much as any other country, knows the real threat that China poses. So I believe that India can have a huge influence on that debate and also use its economic power to influence the way we all deal with China.
Okay.
And I talked about things like supply
Yeah.
chains. I know a lot of companies are now relocating their supply chains to India. I know that India is looking at where you source critical minerals from,
Yeah.
your key components from. So, you know, it's a bit of a cliche that we're sort of moving from a unipolar world to a
Yeah.
multipolar world, but we are. And that requires, you know, lots of countries to step up. I think Japan has also a really important role to play as a close neighbor of China, a key Indo-Pacific player. But what we can't do is just assume that if we do nothing, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And that is what we have learnt the hard way. We were hugely distracted after the Cold War. We really thought that it wasn't going to be a problem anymore, that everybody believed in freedom and democracy, that we could simply let Russia get on with it. That proved to be completely wrong.
Yeah.
And in order to protect our lives and protect the values we hold dear, we have to all be active in that debate.
You talked about economic power, and that's an interesting one because economic power and political power should actually have some connection, but often we act as though the two are independent of each other. Many companies in the West have invested hundreds, thousands of billions in China and now say we have too much at stake. Do you think in retrospect they were too hasty in doing that?
Yeah, well, as you say, money talks.
Yeah.
Money talks, and we all know that. And yes, we had too much dependence on China. And this is why in the United Kingdom we made the decision to remove Huawei from our telecoms networks. We put in an Investment Protection Act. But we went through a huge period before that, sort of rolling out the red carpet to China. We had a so-called golden era where, despite what had already happened, I mean, things like Tiananmen Square had already happened. There were lots of signs that it was not a wholly benign regime. But nevertheless, when the West, we had this belief, and it turned out to be a naive belief, that with more economic freedom, China would become freer.
Yeah.
But actually, that economic growth has been used to undermine our way of life. And we have woken up to it now in the UK. I still think we need to do more. We need to do more with our allies, but there's been very much a change in mindset.
Has there, is my question, because you had that big state banquet for the president, which in retrospect was probably a mistake, don't you think?
Yes,
you agree.
It was.
a mistake.
The whole strategy was a mistake.
Okay.
And the UK was not the only country that followed that strategy.
Yes.
It was
all of the West, really.
The decision to allow China to join the World Trade Organization, the way we allowed that to happen. Yeah. I mean, back in the 1990s, which is an era we keep coming back to, the Chinese economy was the 10th the size of the US economy. We were dealing with something completely different to what we're dealing with now.
But when we hear you say that, and we have many concerns about China and India, I think we agree with you and we feel good. But we just wonder, is this actually the view of the UK political establishment? I mean, the UK government has been very unwilling to accept that China is any kind of threat.
ABP न्यूज़ आपको रखे आगे।